Grolo here. With CitizenCon Direct fast approaching, I felt the time was right to expand on something I said around 6 months ago on a podcast with Space Tomato. It was a bold statement, and some of you vehemently disagreed. I stand by it. I'm going to roll the clip now, and then we're going to dig into why Star Citizen will be the first game for almost everyone. And before I roll it, I want to extend you an invitation to watch CitizenCon Direct with me. It's going to be a ton of fun. If you want to join us, join the watch party, open unhinged.gg in your browser right now and follow the links on there to Discord. I hope to see you there. Now, let's roll this clip.
Star Citizen's future as an MMO. Star Citizen is a very unique project. I think it's one of the MMOs that attracts most people not from the MMO genre, myself included, and that gives it a bit of an edge. Do you think Star Citizen can kind of break the mold and make a unique place for itself in the market that people will pay attention to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I genuinely believe that if the project is a success and C.I.G can overcome all the technical challenges, that is not like a guaranteed thing, right? Like that is a Herculean task. But if they are successful, like Star Citizen could make WoW 2004 look like a minor event in gaming. It could even define like a new class of game. Like MMO might be selling it short. What made WoW successful in 2004, in my opinion, is it wasn't just about the game. It was about the backdrop that it provided for people, like as people, right? People were having weddings and funerals, and like they were planning like grand like PvP events, and it wasn't even about the raids and the dungeons. It was like all this.
It was like Second Life, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the fact that like Star Citizen is prioritizing that type of gameplay, in addition to giving like this super high fidelity environment and just the sheer scope and expanse of like how much space there will be, like a lot of the problems that you see in MMOs today, like kind of fade away with that reality. A lot of it has to do with like you're squishing together like a very competitive player base into like a small area, and you're kind of forcing that on people, and like there's no other way to play the game. But like one thing interesting about Star Citizen is like, yes, if you want that kind of gameplay, you can have it. Go to Pyro, go to this moon. There's going to be like a lot of like concentrated PvP there, but it's also offering enough space that players can kind of go off and find their own little hidden corner in the universe and play the way they want to play. And
as somebody who Star Citizen is the only MMO I've played, I don't have the perspective to understand how significant that is. Do other MMOs not focus on creating a lot of space for players to go and make their own areas?
Not really. I think it's a technical challenge, right? Like it's the whole reason
making
for
the world big enough.
Yeah, it's the whole reason for dynamic server meshing. Like the reason like they can't do what Ashes of Creation come out and they're like, hey, we're going to create this big map, and it's one of the biggest maps I've ever seen in a sword and sorcery MMO. But the way they're going to do it is they're going to grid it up, and they're going to have a server assigned to each region and blah blah blah. Simple. Like Star Citizen couldn't do that because like the space that they want to provide people to operate in is so vast that you literally could not grid it up and serve it that way. They had to come out with a new technology. And so yeah, I think the amount of space they're offering people is a byproduct of like what they're doing on the innovation front. And so yeah, very interesting. I don't know for sure that even C.I.G fully understands what they're building or what they're building towards. And if they do, I often wonder, when did they figure it out? On some level, it feels like what Star Citizen will become is an inevitability. As a species, we're obviously fascinated by virtual worlds. We've likely been creating them for as long as we've existed, in the form of written or verbal stories, pictures, video, and now as digital simulations. One constant has remained true. We want more fidelity and fewer limits in our storytelling and in the worlds that our imaginations bring to life. There's a lot of focus on the risks associated with the Star Citizen project. Few are more popular to discuss than, what if the funding dries up? On the flip side, who's asking the question, what if it doesn't? what if the funding continues to pour in or accelerates? What if the gamers being drawn to this project continue to vote loudly with their wallets and insist on finally getting something different, something new? Looking at past trends, this seems a safer bet than the alternative, pessimistic position. Assuming we continue, then for the first time in decades, we are poised to experience a monumental leap forward in immersion, and it will be delivered by Star Citizen and its simulated universe. The backdrop of this simulation has ended up being a space adventure. However, that part isn't as important as you might think. Someone, somewhere, at some time, was going to build something like this. It could have just as easily been a sword and sorcery fantasy backdrop, or something of the post-apocalyptic variety, perhaps. We just needed an appetite for risk, enough money, and enough time. C.I.G is the fortunate group that gets to implement this. They figured out how to raise the large sums of money required, within a framework that affords them the long span of time needed. Chris, obviously, has a tolerance for risk, and more importantly, a vision. As players, we're fortunate that this kicked off over a decade ago. It means that we stand a good shot of seeing it become reality. It could have just as easily taken another decade or two for a project like this to start. And if you're around my age, that would not bode well for your ability to explore and play in a high-fidelity sandbox like this. Any potential competitor would have to have started years ago to even have a shot at delivering something like this within the next decade. And well, they're just not out there. This level of ambition is history in the making. If this sounds hyperbolic, ask yourself, in the early 2000s, as you sat there launching EverQuest or World of Warcraft, and you were daydreaming during the loading screen about how mind-blowing MMOs might be in the year 2030, what did you think? How close to those expectations have we gotten? We're only 4 years away. Do you think we're going to make it? If we do, it'll be by the skin of our teeth, and you'll have legions of hungry gamers and one ambitious organization that was able to funnel their contributions. You'll have those people to thank. That is, of course, unless what you imagined back then was receiving a quest to kill 12 zombies in UE5. In which case, you're good to go. It's not that other organizations wouldn't have loved to build a game that would capture almost anyone. It's that they were missing one or more of the many ingredients required. Ambition, technology, time, money, and vision. And we're not talking small amounts. All of these were and will continue to be needed in abundance. First, when I say everyone, I'm not saying absolutely everyone, but a significantly larger percentage of everyone than we've seen in the past. There will be blockers for some people always. Some people will have a strong preference or restriction that will preclude them from participating, such as the inability to deal with first-person perspective, or a complete and total aversion to science fiction. Others will not meet the hardware requirements for a game like this, although that will change over time. With that said, think of the largest, most successful games you can think of. I've got my list. Yours probably differs. I'm thinking of games like World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, Fortnite, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Skyrim, Minecraft, and there's many others that could probably make this list, but you get the idea. Now ask yourself, why weren't they even bigger? As big as each game was, what curtailed its growth? This is a thought exercise. I'm not suggesting any of these games are flawed or bad because it didn't grow bigger. Quite the contrary, these games achieved astounding success in their respective genre, domain, or game type. But something limited their potential size. What was it? It could be that the type of player that gravitates to World of Warcraft enjoys things like persistence and progression, while the type of player that gravitates towards Call of Duty prefers action combat and the immersive feeling of the first-person interface. while the Grand Theft Auto player enjoys an immersive, high-fidelity, interactive environment. And a Final Fantasy player enjoys fashion, housing, social activities, and so on and so on. Said another way, while these games offer depth, none offer a tremendous amount of breadth in this type of playstyles that can be accommodated. Breadth, especially with any sort of fidelity, has been elusive. And breadth is exactly what we need for something bigger. Something with a larger potential audience than any one type of game would attract. Think about how games are marketed today. The newest Battlefield is marketed as an FPS, perhaps with a battle royale mode or different objective modes. The upcoming Arc Raiders will be an extraction shooter. The recipe for a game like World of Warcraft is so well known there's exactly 0 surprises per expansion. Then you have your survival crafting games, your social sandbox worlds, your action RPGs, your Souls-like games, your racing and sports games. Everything coming out is a certain shape that fits a certain hole. They're narrow. And if they're good games, they probably have some depth. Now there's many reasons that the kind of breadth we're going to talk about have been elusive. Technology itself, the ability to harness enough compute, time. You can't have breadth without depth, or players would gravitate towards the deeper gameplay of the game that aligns with their preferences. But the time requirements of building both is multiplicative. And of course, time is money. And anything that demands a lot of time and money carries an enormous amount of risk, and so on and so forth. And it all comes back to the ingredients we already talked about. Now, imagine if you had all the ingredients. What if you could combine enough of the aspects of World of Warcraft, Battlefield, Arc Raiders, Dune, Awakening, PAX Day, Dark Souls, and a few others, such that you could attract all of those distinct groups of players into the same game? You may be thinking that some players play them all, and that's not the point. The point is, there's many players that love WoW or Dark Souls that do not like Battlefield, and vice versa. So if you could pull this off, and you could pull these various types of players together into one game, what benefit would that even have? Now, let's turn our attention to the ultimate vision of Star Citizen. One moment, it's a flight sim, as you fly safely from point A to point B, and the next moment, it's a survival game. You've crash-landed and are now fighting for your life on an alien world, as some terrible storm rages around you, while you watch your oxygen meter depleting and feel the growling of your stomach. As you struggle through this, some crazy local wildlife finds you, and now, suddenly, it's an FPS, with a fidelity that matches or exceeds the titans of the battlefield, while imposing even fewer limits. Across the universe, around another star, it's a racing sim for another player, and they just won another race in what's shaping up to be an impressive racing career, one that easily pays for their penthouse suite in Area 18. Speaking of Area 18, there's a competitive corporation based there, and to them it's a game of economies, one that demands detailed planning and management as they build, maintain, and craft items needed by countless players and NPCs alike. And it demands a sophisticated production and supply chain, one that powers trade and storefronts while employing haulers across multiple star systems. In one of those systems, there's a miner who just delivered some goods to the corporation's refining facility and collected his paycheck. Now he's headed home to his fabricated house that overlooks a lake on Terra. It's not much, but they're new to the game, to the business, and it sure beats that apartment they started in. This is a game that will offer teamwork-centric resource extraction, with deep gameplay in areas like mining and salvage, jobs and roles such as engineer, mechanic, hacker, cooking, farming, fishing, maybe even husbandry. And plenty for those role players among us. Things like decoration, hygiene, attire, homes and rentals, and immersion everywhere you look, with assets just waiting to be brought to life. Arcade machines, billiards or pool tables, cocktail parties, vending machines, bank machines, usable terminals of all kinds, and on and on. And finally, exploration, core to humanity's desire to venture forth. Now, who might find such a game interesting? How about DayZ players, Ark players, Dune players, Call of Duty and Battlefield players would find themselves at home. Enjoyers of the Microsoft Flight Sim, or the Crew Motorfest, Factorio, Farming Simulator, No Man's Sky, many EVE Online and World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy players as well. This list goes on and on. It's easy to hyper-focus on the flight sim aspects of Star Citizen, since after all, C.I.G has gained a lot of fame and attention for, well, selling spaceships. We can talk about flight models and time to kill for hours. We can spend just as much time talking about the game's economies or its industrial aims. And these are great conversations to be had. However, among all of these conversations, it's easy to miss the focus this game places on the mundane. Clothing stores with aisles and racks of goods. Stores that focus on casual attire, others that focus on business attire, and yet others that cater to the person working in the caves as a miner. Furniture stores. The restaurant and bar or club scene. The kitchens and bathrooms. Star Citizen puts an enormous amount of effort into the mundane. And for good reason. This is how we bring simulated universes to life. Don't think for one moment that if a game that was focused strictly on being the best flight sim, or the best combined arms game, or the best insert your favorite game mode here, that it would put so much effort into all these mundane things. This is what you do when you want to create an alternate reality. One that's just as fun for the person who enjoys throwing a virtual celebration at their virtual home with food and drink they virtually prepared, as it is for the ace combat pilot, miner, medic, soldier, trader, or explorer. Sounds like too much, doesn't it? In past comments, folks have said to me, a game that tries to do everything does nothing well. Or, said another way, a game that tries to please everyone pleases no one. I think those comments are grounded in pragmatism. They've been true statements for a long time. The thing about that statement is that it's... what's it mean by everyone? Is that 5% of everyone? Or 20%? Or 50%? It's easy for that statement to stay true because there's no such thing as an absolute. That doesn't mean the spirit of the statement will remain true. Technology is changing things. We've talked about the technology behind Star Citizen quite extensively on this channel. So, this mosh pit was causing the network to melt down, basically, because we had too many servers needing to share all the same state due to player proximity. The network simply couldn't keep up with the number of bits that needed to fly back and forth between the servers on this image, which were represented by the boxes above Entity Graph there. So where do we go from here? I put together a list here of things that we could do. Okay. I've already got us a few things on the screen here to get us started. But let's visualize what a dual ride is. So let's take the example that they were talking about in the video, or we were talking about, where you have a stowed ship. And we all know, or I think we know, that stowed ships are stored in the global database. Ships that are actually in the persistent universe are stored in the Entity Graph database. And so we have these two databases on the screen here. Now, there's a few ways of implementing this, right? One way would be the user that I have up here representing the client application or the actual Star Citizen game client. Okay, so what I have here on the screen is a crappy drawing I made of the YouTube homepage, right? These sidebars are the the edges of the page, and then all the little boxes in there represent the tile of videos that you see when you go to your YouTube homepage. So in this example, I've drawn a ship that has a pilot and his buddy down in the turret under the nose of the ship, right? And these two players are sharing a replicant. This is a bubble type logical object with boundaries. And the idea is that as your ship is flying along, the replicant sphere is moving with it, and it knows. If you've watched any of these videos, and I'll link some below to help you out, then you should understand how and why C.I.G's technology differs from those who've come before, as well as modern competitors. This investment in technology is breaking down the barriers that kept breadth, depth, and fidelity from all being realized together on a grand scale. Or rather, on a massive scale of the multiplayer variety. Online. The how of it, you can think of this way. In order to achieve a massive scale with many players, you need to ensure enough server computing power is available to provide a playable experience. Now, in classic architectures, one way to do this was to limit the amount of compute a player could demand by limiting the ways they could interact with the system. You see this in games like EVE Online and WoW and other tab target systems where players communicate their target and then the way that they want to interact with that target. As opposed to an action combat game where you're either ratcheting up the server compute or you're pushing more authority to the client. And by now we all know that client authority can be problematic in a competitive or simulated environment. So what do you do when you want to remove the limits for players while maintaining integrity? Where you want to allow players the ability to bring huge, computationally expensive equipment or vehicles onto the field, and you want to allow them to congregate in unexpected, non-instanced ways. Well, you invest in new architecture and new technology, and you invest big, because this stuff is not easy. Now, many love to decry the broad feature list of Star Citizen as scope creep. In reality, it's just the beginning. Of course, it won't all make 1.0, but 1.0 is not where the vision of this project ends. Let's roll this clip of Chris Roberts speaking at a bar citizen in China, in which he referred to a set of features planned for the, quote, ultimate version of Star Citizen.
Will we be able to fish in game?
Eventually, yes. Not in the short term, but yeah. It won't be. It's not in the 1.0 roadmap, but we have discussed having fishing in the game. You will be able to farm, fish, live off the grid, and essentially just like a survival game in the ultimate version of Star Citizen, in some corner of the galaxy, and maybe never meet another person.
Ooh,
if you
wow.
want to do that.
It's worth repeating. The ultimate version of Star Citizen. This is what we start working toward after the release of 1.0, which is, in many ways, an MVP. The ultimate version of Star Citizen is an MMO, a survival game, an FPS combat game, a flight sim, a racing sim, a game of economies and trade, of resource control and extraction, of crafting and building, a game that demands a variety of professions ranging from engineering to tuning to hacking to cooking and fishing and farming. A game in which you can spend time fighting, exploring, role-playing, all in high-fidelity environments offering extensive immersion. Decorate your apartment, dress your character, monitor your hygiene meter, all things quite popular with the RP crowd that finds a home in places like Final Fantasy XIV or ESO. Cozy up to an arcade game cabinet, or a pool table, or grab a cocktail from the bar, or a can of soda from a vending machine. All assets in the game now waiting to be brought to life for added depth, on vessels carrying you across the various skies, or in the commercial districts of planet-side cities. And While this is certainly a large list of playstyles and features, the truly impressive part will be the depth offered in each, something that technology formerly demanded be traded in exchange for breadth. As early as some of Star Citizen's systems are, you already see it. Compare mining in the Star Citizen Alpha to mining in EVE Online or New World. Mining is a fairly involved discipline that features multiple modes: ship mining, hand mining, ground vehicle mining, powered armor suit mining, while incorporating various configurations and gadgets such as different mining heads and devices that can be applied to the rocks themselves, and so on. And the fidelity of the system allows it to interact strongly with various other systems, such as cargo management. What are you doing with all those rocks or diamonds that you're pulling out of the ground? Injuries can easily happen while mining, which pulls in the medical game loop. Refining. Of course, eventually this will feed into crafting and building and improving the quality of our ships and who knows what else. Science. Propulsion, certainly, once we get refining in the hands of players. And you get the idea. You can begin to see how impactful each granule of fidelity or immersion becomes. We're talking about a game in which someday you'll wake up to the Luke Skywalker experience, living on a remote moon. Your first adventure thrusts you into a survival situation and takes you through many lunar encounters before you ever head to the stars for the first time. You're hunting, you're clawing for water, surviving terrible storms, fighting in cave systems, talking with and trading with NPCs near your starting village, all long before boarding your first spacecraft and realizing just how big the game gets. Because it already by that point likely felt bigger than most other games you've played. And now, as you ascend through the atmosphere, you begin to see just how far it goes, as if you had just taken the red pill. What I'm describing may sound fantastical, and while we know this will not be the 1.0 experience, this is clearly the direction and a point they want to reach on their way to the ultimate vision. Sadly, you and I know this all too well, so we'll never quite get the red pill experience, having been there through the development. But there's a whole host of people positioned to get that experience one day. I was tracking a discussion following a podcast I participated in recently, in which players were debating over gameplay modes. There was a set of players saying that they were here for the flight sim. They couldn't care less about FPS gameplay. And there was another set of players with the exact opposite point of view. Here's the reality. They strengthen each other. Star Citizen features high fidelity of FPS gameplay and high fidelity flight sim experience. And they each lend meaning and compound the fidelity for the other. You don't have to make a trade-off. If you need to get troops on the ground, you're going to do that with pilots. Those pilots will need the defense and cover of other pilots. You suddenly need a variety of vessel roles. And the whole time these pilots are playing their flight sim, there's a group of infantry in the back of the ship discussing the landing and their plans immediately following the landing. They're having this discussion as they're strapped into these troop seats listening to the roar of the engines of the ship that is transporting them. One wrong move from the pilot and they could all go up in smoke. For that ride, their lives are in the hands of that pilot. And as much as that pilot hates FPS gameplay, they sure should be thankful it exists, because in that moment, nothing gives their role more meaning. And this is the benefit of bringing all of those different players into one environment. If you go back to the beginning of this video, that was a question I asked. Assuming we could bring all these different players together, how would it benefit us? This is the real power of this kind of breadth in a game. The compounding effect that each game mode will have on every other game mode. A lot of folks view C.I.G's competitors as Blizzard, Bethesda, Riot. I think that list just scratches the surface. If you've paid attention to the videos that I've done, you'll note that I compare C.I.G to the big tech companies as often as I do other game companies. Long term, I think C.I.G will be in direct competition with the likes of Facebook and its Metaverse project. That's the level of game and fidelity we're talking about. What's being built, whether we recognize it or not, whether the builders know it or not, isn't just the next MMO. It's not just the next action shooter or wing commander, as future enjoyers of Squadron 42 will likely believe. No. What's being built is an alternate reality, a second life, a simulated universe. A system whose ultimate version will be an alternate and reimagined implementation of systems like the metaverse. You could open your eyes to see a bunch of doors and interconnected spaces offering unique and immersive 3D experiences, right? That's the metaverse pitch. Or you could wake up on that moon, or in your Area 18 apartment, where you wander down to the local G-Lock bar and catch up on the news and happenings of the simulated universe all around you. Sound crazy? Ambition like this usually does, until it doesn't.
But you know, I think about this, and what about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Sure.
What the hell is that exactly?
Well, it's become a place where people are publishing information.
Right.
So everybody can have their own homepage, companies are there, the latest information. It's wild what's going on. You can send electronic mail to people. It is the big new thing.
Yeah, but you know, it's easy to criticize something you don't fully understand, which is my position here.
Go ahead.
But I can remember a couple of months ago, there was like a big breakthrough announcement that on the internet or on some computer deal, they were going to broadcast a baseball game. You could listen to a baseball game on your computer. And I just thought to myself, does radio ring a bell? You know what I mean? It's just...
There's a difference.
There is a difference.
It's not a huge difference.
What is the difference?
But you can listen to the baseball game whenever you want.
All right.
Too.
Oh, I see. So it's stored in one of your memory deals,
Exactly.
and then you can come
That's
back
the
a year
RAM
later.
thing you talked about earlier.
Yeah. Do tape recorders ring a bell? Yeah, I just don't know. What can you, just knowing me the little you know me now, what am I missing here? What do I need?
Well, if you want to learn about the latest cigars or auto racing statistics.
Well, you know, I've got that covered. I subscribe to 2 British magazines devoted entirely to motorsports, and I call the Quaker State Speed Line about 2 times a half hour. So now, would the computer give me more than I'm getting that way?
Oh, you can find other people who have the same unusual interests you do, and.
You mean the troubled loner chat room on the internet?
Absolutely.
Funny, huh? Who knew that David Letterman was the original Redditor? Some things never change. Now, fast forward to today, and you have plenty of folks pushing back on the ambition with the exact same arguments. Well, this game already did X, or who in their right mind would need Y, or call me when they deliver Z, or wake me up when it's an actual game. There's a term for this. It's called lack of foresight. If you're someone that has foresight, you're probably participating in these online arenas and feeling a lot like Bill Gates did sitting in that chair trying to educate Letterman. Trust me, I can relate. I often find myself in that chair. Now, Star Citizen may not be the first to do any of this. It may not even be the first to do all of it. There's been broad platforms before. We've mentioned a few of them in this video, but Star Citizen is likely the first to do it right for a large portion of the gaming population. To tie it all together behind a theme and a purpose, similar to how WoW did in 2004 prior to the explosion of social media, but with a far, far larger scope. This can all be credited in a large part to the fidelity of their simulated environment, the verse. And that, in turn, can be credited to their astounding investment in technology, which, in turn, can be credited to all of us backers. There's no guarantee they'll pull it off, but one thing we know for certain is they would not be able to pull it off without us. It is precisely because of us that a company such as C.I.G is able to take such a risk that no AAA studio was ever going to take. Those studios are quite content putting out Part 6 or Part 9 or Part 12 of a franchise they know to generate income. As a result of all of us and ponying up and saying, we want something different, something better, we might just get it a few decades ahead of schedule. Now, it's time for you to weigh in the comments below. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, and please, bring your foresight. Until then, Grolo out.